A 4-year-old boy had never taken a single step in his life because of an incurable paralysis. When the cleaner brought her 7-year-old daughter to work at the mansion, the boy's millionaire father witnessed something so shocking it brought him to his knees. The afternoon sun cast a golden light across the mansion's impeccably manicured lawn, turning every leaf in the garden into a small green jewel. For little 4-year-old Leo, this world of vibrant colors seen from his wheelchair was his kingdom. His small fingers gripped the edge of a ceramic planter, trying to push himself just 1 inch closer to his red ball, which had rolled under a rose bush. A whimper of frustration escaped his lips. A sound nearly lost in the distant hum of a lawnmower. He didn't like to ask for help. His dad always said he was a champion, and champions kept trying until they succeeded. Resilience was his shield, forged in a life of small challenges that would be invisible to others. But beneath that shield was a sensitivity that made every harsh word, every cold glance, a deep wound. He trusted adults. That's what kids did, which is why confusion was a constant knot in his chest. A riddle he couldn't solve. Why did some people who were supposed to take care of him sometimes make him feel so small and sad? On the other side of the yard, near the glass doors leading to the living room, Elena, the housekeeper, wiped a soft cloth over the window frames. Her movements were methodical, but her experienced, kind eyes didn't miss a single detail of the scene. She came to the house 3 times a week, and her mother's heart had learned to read between the lines of silence. There was a pattern that deeply troubled her. On the days she arrived, she always found Leo quieter, his gaze distant, as if a frightened little bird were trapped inside him. It sometimes took hours for a genuine smile to appear on his face, usually prompted by a silly face she made or an animal cracker she brought hidden in her apron pocket. She felt the difference in the air. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief when she arrived, but there was a cold tension that lingered before, a shadow she couldn't name but could feel on her skin. Beatrice, the nanny, emerged from the house, carrying a tray with a glass of juice and some apple slices. Her posture was impeccable, her uniform perfectly pressed, a professional smile on her face. "Leo, sweetie, don't push yourself so hard," she said in a syrupy voice that, to Elena, sounded like ground glass. "Let B get that for you." She bent down, retrieved the red ball, and placed it in the boy's lap. Leo didn't thank her. He just shrank into himself and stared at his hands. The gesture, so subtle, was like an alarm for Elena. A happy child would have cheered, would have thanked her with a cry of joy. But Leo seemed resigned, as if this small act of kindness was just part of a play he didn't want to be in. Beatrice adjusted the collar of Leo's shirt with a brisk, almost impatient movement. "Come on, drink your juice. You need to get strong." Elena finished cleaning the window and walked over, a warm smile trying to break the ice. "It's a beautiful day to play outside, isn't it, sweet angel?" she said, winking at Leo. The boy looked up at her, and for an instant, the housekeeper saw the spark of life she was always searching for. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He just nodded. Beatrice straightened up, looking at Elena with a veiled superiority. "He's being a little fussy today. It's sometimes hard to deal with his frustrations." Elena felt her blood boil, but she kept her composure. She wanted to say it wasn't fussiness, it was sadness, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't her place. Not yet. As she helped Leo hold the glass, his little hands trembling slightly, she noticed it. Discreet, almost imperceptible, on the delicate skin of his forearm was a purplish mark with the unmistakable shape of fingers squeezed too tight. Her heart gave a painful jolt. She looked up and met Beatrice's gaze. The nanny smiled, but her eyes were as cold as 2 chips of ice, a silent warning for her not to dare question anything. 2 days passed, but the image of that purple bruise on Leo's arm and Beatrice's icy smile haunted Eleanor's thoughts like a dark cloud. Every time she polished a surface to a shine, Her worry clouded her reflection. She felt trapped between the need to protect the boy and the fear of losing the job that supported her own family. That day, while vacuuming the plush carpet in the playroom, the sound of Beatrice's voice came from the hallway, sharp and cold, devoid of any sweetness. "Are you going to stand there with that crybaby face all day? Swallow it, Leo. The world isn't going to stop for you. Nobody pities you, so get that through your head." Elena abruptly shut off the vacuum, the sudden silence making the atmosphere even heavier. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the proof she needed. The cruelty wasn't physical in that moment, but the words were like sharp little knives, stabbing into a child's sensitive soul. Gathering a courage she didn't know she possessed, she walked to the hallway. She found Leo in the middle of the corridor, his wheelchair motionless, his head bowed, and his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beatrice stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of impatience. Upon seeing Elena, she instantly softened her expression. "Oh, Elena, I was just trying to encourage him to be more independent. He needs to learn to handle his own frustrations." Elena took a deep breath, the smell of cleaning products mixing with the bitter taste of injustice in her mouth. "Oh, Dean, I heard you," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "You were a little harsh with him." Beatrice raised an eyebrow, a condescending smile forming on her lips. "Harsh? My dear, I'm being realistic. This boy lives in a bubble of privilege. If I don't prepare him for the harshness of the world, who will? I'm being firm for his own good." The response was so calculated, so perversely logical, that for a moment it made Eleanor doubt herself. Maybe she was overreacting, but then she looked at Leo, at the loneliness and fear in his eyes, and she knew she wasn't. This wasn't preparing him for the world. It was destroying his world from the inside out. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the boy huddled in his wheelchair replayed in her mind. She had to do something. She had to talk to Mr. Davenport, Leo's father. He was a busy man, always on the phone, surrounded by an aura of importance. But he loved his son. She saw it in the rare moments when he was truly present, when he knelt beside the wheelchair and the business world vanished, leaving only a father and his boy. The opportunity came the next afternoon. Mr. Davenport arrived home early, a rare occurrence. He was in his office, the door ajar, talking on his cell phone about deadlines and contracts. Eleanor waited for him to hang up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Davenport, excuse me, may I have a quick word?" He gestured for her to enter, but his eyes were already fixed on his laptop screen. "Yes, Elena, please be brief. I'm in the middle of something important," she began, her voice trembling. She spoke of Leo's sadness, of how frightened he seemed, of the harsh words she had overheard. She avoided mentioning the mark on his arm, afraid of sounding too accusatory. Mr. Davenport listened with a polite but distracted patience. When she finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, weary. "Elena, I appreciate your concern, I really do. But Beatrice came with the highest recommendations. She's a professional with experience in special needs children. Perhaps you're misinterpreting things. She has a firmer method, it's true, but she's assured me it's for his development." He smiled, a smile that was a wall. "I appreciate your diligence, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." The door was closed to her. Defeated, Elena turned to leave the hallway, feeling the weight of failure on her shoulders. As she looked up, her blood ran cold. Standing at the end of the hall, partially hidden in the shadow of a doorway, was Beatrice. She had heard every word, and on her face was a subtle, victorious, and terrifyingly menacing smile. The week following her conversation with Mr. Davenport was suffocating. Elena felt Beatrice's eyes on her at every moment, a cold and constant surveillance that made her feel like an intruder in enemy territory. The nanny, for her part, had become the personification of perfection in front of anyone else. She was attentive to Leo, read stories with funny voices, and helped him with his physical therapy exercises with the patience of a saint. But it was all a performance. Elena saw the truth in the details, in the subtly tight grip on Leo's shoulder to keep him quiet, in the way her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at the boy, and, above all, in Leo's withdrawal. The little champion was disappearing, replaced by an apathetic child whose large eyes seemed to have lost their spark. The house, once just a workplace, had become a silent battlefield, and Elena felt disarmed. On Friday, Mr. Davenport called her into his office. His face held a mixture of stress and concern. "Elena, I need a huge favor," he began, getting straight to the point. "An unavoidable business trip has come up, an important merger. I'll have to be away for the long weekend, from today until Tuesday." He paused, glancing at a photo of Leo on his desk. "I hate to leave him, but it's impossible to take him. Beatrice will be in charge, of course, but the house is very large and she needs to focus exclusively on him. I would feel much more at ease if you could extend your stay during these days. You would handle the meals, general organization. I'll pay you triple for your time." The request hit her like a wave. The idea of spending an entire weekend under the same roof as Beatrice was terrifying, but the image of Leo, vulnerable and alone with that woman for 3 whole days, was unbearable. It was an opportunity, perhaps the only one, to keep an eye on them, to be a human shield for that boy. She took a deep breath, the decision forming in her mind. "Mr. Davenport, I would be happy to help, but I have one problem." His expression tightened slightly, expecting a refusal. "I can't stay overnight. My daughter, little Anna, is only 7. I can't leave her alone." The mention of her daughter seemed to humanize the situation for the businessman. He relaxed his shoulders, a flicker of understanding in his tired eyes. He thought for a moment, the solution coming to him in the practical, immediate way he was used to solving his business problems. "Elena, that's not a problem," he said with renewed conviction. "Bring her with you. The house is huge. You can stay in the downstairs guest suite. It has 2 beds, a private bath. She'll love the garden. Please, your presence here would put my mind at ease infinitely." The proposal caught her by surprise. Bring Anna into this tense environment, but on the other hand, refusing meant abandoning Leo to his fate. Looking through the office window, she saw the little boy in the yard, alone in his chair, staring at nothing. The image sealed her decision. "All right, Mr. Davenport, we'll stay." That evening, Elena packed a small bag for herself and Anna. Her daughter, a girl with curious eyes and an observant spirit, was ecstatic at the prospect of spending the weekend in a castle house, as she called it. While Anna chatted about the pool and the giant garden, Elena felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. She was taking her daughter into the lion's den. When they arrived, Beatrice greeted them with a smile that fooled no one. "How wonderful! A little friend for Leo," she said, her voice dripping with a falseness that made Elena's skin crawl. She led Anna over to Leo, who was in the living room. Anna, always a bit shy with strangers, hid behind her mother's legs. Leo looked at her with cautious curiosity. For a brief moment, their worlds touched. 2 children from completely different universes, united by innocence. Elena watched the scene, praying that her daughter's presence might bring a little light into the darkness she felt in that house. She had no idea that quiet little Anna, with her eyes that saw more than adults imagined, was about to become the witness who would change absolutely everything. The first day of the long weekend began with an almost frightening normalcy. Mr. Davenport left early after a tight hug for Leo and detailed instructions for everyone. Beatrice played her part to perfection, organizing educational games and healthy snacks. Anna, after her initial shyness, began to open up. She wasn't sure how to interact with Leo and his chair, but her childish curiosity overcame any awkwardness. She pushed her toy cars near him, narrated made-up stories for her dolls, and gradually, Leo's silence began to be punctuated by occasional giggles. Elena, busy in the kitchen preparing lunch, felt a cautious relief. Maybe the presence of another child was inhibiting Beatrice. Maybe everything would be okay. But the tranquility was a thin layer of ice over deep, turbulent waters. The shift began subtly. Beatrice realized that Elena was genuinely busy with household chores. The mansion was immense, and keeping it spotless, in addition to cooking for everyone, demanded nearly total attention. With Elena confined to the kitchen or the laundry room, Beatrice began to let her guard down. Her tone of voice with Leo, when she thought no one was listening, lost its forced sweetness and took on a sharp, impatient edge. "Faster, Leo. I don't have all day," she hissed when he was slow to pick up a colored pencil that had fallen. "Stop looking at me with that face. You're not fooling me." Anna, who was playing in a corner of the playroom, heard it. She looked up from her drawings, her large brown eyes fixed on the scene. She saw Beatrice's expression transform, the smile vanishing to be replaced by an ugly scowl. She saw Leo shrink, the light in his face extinguishing like a candle in a draught. Anna didn't understand the exact words, but she understood the feeling. It was the same tone her teacher used when she got very, very angry. But Leo hadn't done anything. Later, in the garden, the cruelty became more explicit. Elena was in the back of the house, hanging clothes on the line. Beatrice had taken the children outside for some sun. Anna, ever the observer, found a perfect hiding spot behind a large hydrangea bush, where she could watch lizards without being seen. From her secret post, she saw Beatrice pick up Leo's ball and, instead of handing it to him, deliberately throw it far away into a flower bed where the wheelchair couldn't reach. "Want your ball?" Beatrice said, her voice low and venomous. "Then go get it." "Oh, that's right. You can't, can you? What a shame. Maybe you should try harder to walk instead of expecting everyone to do everything for you." The words hit Leo with physical force. His eyes filled with tears and a sob escaped his throat. He tried to speak, to say it wasn't his fault, but the words wouldn't come out, trapped in a knot of humiliation and fear. Anna watched it all, her little heart pounding against her chest. She felt an anger she had never felt before. It was unfair, so unfair. Leo was her new friend. He was quiet and kind, and he had a beautiful smile when he forgot he was sad. Why was this woman so mean to him? Fear paralyzed her for a moment. Fear that the mean woman might be mean to her, too, or to her mom. Fear that if she told, no one would believe her. Adults didn't always believe kids. But then she looked at Leo, crying softly in his chair, so alone, and something inside her shifted. The anger turned into courage. She had to protect him. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to. As Beatrice walked away, satisfied with the pain she had caused, Leo tried, with trembling hands, to wipe the tears from his face. That's when he looked up and saw, through the hydrangea leaves, Anna's face. Their eyes met. In that instant, a silent alliance was formed, a pact of complicity and protection sealed by the suffering of one and the indignation of the other. He wasn't alone anymore. Anna's secret discovery created a new dynamic between the children. She became Leo's protective shadow. Using her small stature and agility to her advantage, she developed a habit of hiding in strategic corners of the mansion, behind the heavy curtains in the library, under the grand dining table, or in her favorite hideout, the hydrangea bush in the garden. From her observation posts, she became a silent guardian. Every time Beatrice approached Leo with that cold look, Anna would do something to divert her attention. She would knock over a stack of books with a loud crash, ask for help with a shoelace in a loud voice, or simply appear suddenly with an innocent smile, breaking the tension that only she and Leo seemed to feel. Beatrice was visibly annoyed by the interruptions, but couldn't scold the girl without a plausible reason. To the nanny, Anna was just a slightly clumsy and attention-seeking child. She had no idea she was being watched by a determined pair of eyes. For Leo, Anna's constant presence was like a balm. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone on his island of fear. He began to communicate with her through a code of their own, made of glances and small gestures. A slight tremor in his hand was a sign that he was scared. A quick look in Anna's direction was a silent plea for help, and she always understood. This blossoming friendship was the only light in days that grew increasingly dark. Beatrice, feeling more confident in Mr. Davenport's prolonged absence and frustrated by Anna's constant interruptions, intensified her psychological cruelty. She no longer used just harsh words. She began to use isolation as a weapon. She forbade Leo from watching his favorite cartoons, claiming they weren't educational. She hid his favorite toys, saying he needed to learn to let go of things. Every small joy was systematically taken from him. Anna's obstacle was her own voice. How could she explain to her mother what was happening? The things Beatrice did were subtle, hard to describe. She threw the ball far away. She used a mean voice. To an adult, they might sound like childish tantrums, exaggerated interpretations. She was afraid her mother wouldn't take her seriously. Worse, she was terrified that if she told, her mum would get angry with the nanny, and then Mr. Davenport would send them away. And if they left, who would look after Leo? The thought of leaving him alone with that monster, as she called her in her thoughts, was unbearable. This dilemma weighed on her small shoulders. Protecting Leo meant keeping a terrible secret, a secret that made her feel a lump in her throat every time her mother asked if everything was okay. Yes, "Mommy up," she would lie. "We're having a lot of fun." One afternoon, while Elena was upstairs changing the bed linens, Beatrice took the children to the back porch. She gave Anna a sketchbook and colored pencils, instructing her to sit quietly and draw. Then she turned her attention to Leo. "Your father called," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He said he might have to stay an extra day. It seems his work is more important than you are." Leo shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "That's not true. Daddy loves me." Beatrice's response was a cruel smile. "Does he? If he loved you, he wouldn't leave you behind all the time. He's probably ashamed. No one wants a son who can't even walk." The cruelty of those words was so overwhelming that Leo gasped for air. He doubled over in his chair, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with sobs of pure agony. Anna, sitting just a few feet away, felt every word like a punch. The tip of her colored pencil snapped from the force with which she gripped it. That was the limit. The fear vanished, replaced by a righteous, protective fury. She would not stay silent any longer. She had to do something, and she had to do it now. Anna's fury was a hot flame in her chest. She dropped her sketchbook and stood up. Her legs were trembling, but her steps were firm. She marched over to Leo's wheelchair, where he was still sobbing uncontrollably, and placed a small, protective hand on his shoulder. She said nothing. She just stood there, a little soldier on guard. Beatrice looked at her, first with surprise, then with irritation. "Anna, go back to your drawing. This is a conversation between me and Leo." Anna lifted her chin, her brown eyes flashing. "You're mean," she said, her voice thin but clear as a bell. "You made him cry." The girl's audacity left Beatrice momentarily speechless. She forced a laugh, trying to mask her anger. "Don't be silly, sweetie. Adults sometimes have to say hard things for a child's own good. You wouldn't understand." But Anna didn't move. "You lied. His daddy loves him, and he's not ashamed." Anna's passionate defense seemed to reach Leo through his fog of pain. He stopped sobbing and raised his head, looking at his little defender with red, swollen eyes, an expression of astonishment and gratitude forming on his face. At that moment, Elena appeared at the porch door, carrying a basket of clean laundry. She stopped, sensing the electric tension in the air. She saw Leo's tear-streaked face, her daughter's defiant stance, and Beatrice's mask of barely contained fury. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but loaded with concern. Before Beatrice could invent an excuse, Anna ran to her mother. "Mommy, she said horrible things to Leo. She said his dad doesn't love him." The words came out in a rush, stumbling over one another. Eleanor looked from her daughter to Beatrice, whose face had gone pale. "Is that true?" Eleanor asked, her tone low and dangerous. Beatrice quickly composed herself. "Of course not. It's a misunderstanding. A child's vivid imagination. I was just explaining that his father has a lot of work." She twisted everything. The denial was so smooth, so convincing. For a terrible second, Anna saw the doubt in her mother's eyes. The fear she had dreaded was coming true. The adult didn't believe the child. Elena was torn. On one side was her instinct to protect her daughter, whom she had never seen so agitated and certain. On the other was the reality of her position. A housekeeper accusing a nanny with impeccable references, risking not only her job, but also her credibility. She knelt in front of Anna. "Honey, are you sure about what you heard?" Anna looked into her mother's eyes, tears now welling up in her own, tears of frustration and fear of being disbelieved. "I'm sure, Mommy, I swear. She's always mean to him when you're not looking." The desperate plea in her voice was undeniable. Elena looked at Leo. The boy said nothing, but his eyes, fixed on her, were a silent supplication. He was confirming Anna's story without needing words. That was enough. Elena stood up, her decision made. She didn't know what the consequences would be, but she could no longer ignore this. "Beatrice," she said, her voice firm as steel, "I think we need to have a serious talk now." But the nanny, sensing the net closing in, played her final card. "A talk about your daughter's fantasies. I think the one who needs a serious talk is you, Elena. If you continue with these baseless accusations, I will be forced to inform Mr. Davenport of your inappropriate behavior and your attempt to undermine my authority. We'll see who he believes." The threat hung in the air, cold and calculated. Eleanor felt a chill. Beatrice was right. It was her word against a professional nanny's and a 7-year-old's. She had cornered the lioness, but the lioness still had sharp claws. She looked at the two small faces that depended on her, one devastated by pain, the other by outrage. She was at a dead end. If she spoke up, she could lose everything and leave Leo even more unprotected. If she stayed silent, she would be complicit in the cruelty. What could she do? The standoff on the porch was so thick the air felt hard to breathe. Elena felt everyone's eyes on her. Beatrice's veiled threat, Leo's silent plea, and the unwavering trust of her daughter. Anna. Beatrice's threat echoed in her mind. The cruel gamble of her credibility against a housekeeper's. Losing this job would be a disaster for her small family. But as she looked at Leo's face, marked by recent tears, she saw more than just a child's sadness. She saw the reflection of a spirit being systematically crushed. Silence was the safe choice, the prudent choice, but prudence, in that moment, tasted bitterly of cowardice. Her conscience screamed louder than her fear. She couldn't back down, not now. Taking a deep breath, she took a step forward, placing herself between Beatrice and the children, an instinctive gesture of protection. "You can tell Mr. Davenport whatever you want," Eleanor said, her voice low but vibrating with a strength that surprised herself. "But I will not pretend I don't see what's happening anymore. This child is suffering, and you are the cause of it." The conviction in her words caught Beatrice off guard. The nanny had expected intimidation, not a direct challenge. Her face twisted into a mask of outraged indignation. "How dare you? You're completely out of your mind. I will make you bitterly regret this slander." She turned abruptly, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling Mr. Davenport right now and putting an end to this madness of yours." As Beatrice furiously dialed, Elena knelt and hugged both children. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, more to convince herself than them. Oh, the truth always comes out. The afternoon dragged on in a torture of silence and tension. Beatrice locked herself in the office, from where fragments of an angry phone conversation could be heard. Elena, Anna, and Leo remained in the living room, a small trio of conspirators united by uncertainty. Anna wouldn't let go of Leo's hand, a gesture of solidarity that seemed to give them both strength. Elena prepared a snack, but no one ate. The sound of a car approaching on the mansion's gravel driveway made everyone's heart jump. It was too early for Mr. Davenport to be back. The front door opened, and a tall man with graying hair and broad shoulders walked in. It wasn't Mr. Davenport. He wore an elegant suit, but his face held a kind and worried expression. Beatrice hurried out of the office to greet him. "Dr. Evans, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice laden with false concern. "Doom, the situation here has become untenable." The man, whom Elena recognized as Leo's pediatrician, who visited occasionally, looked at the group in the living room, his expression softening as he saw the boy. "Beatrice called me. Richard is in an important meeting and can't be disturbed. She told me Leo had a nervous breakdown and that the presence of strangers was agitating him." He walked over, ignoring Beatrice and kneeling beside Leo's wheelchair. "Hello, champion. How are you feeling?" Leo just stared at him, his eyes wide and frightened. Beatrice interjected, her voice full of venom. "He won't speak, doctor. He's in shock. This woman and her daughter have been scaring him with terrible stories and accusations." Dr. Evans frowned, looking from Elena to Anna and then back to Leo's pale face. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Leo," he said gently, "is what B is saying true? Did they scare you?" The boy was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved from Anna to Elena and then to the nanny's face, who was staring at him with a clear warning in her gaze. Then he did something no one expected. He slowly raised a trembling hand and pointed a small, accusing finger directly at Beatrice. And with a choked but unmistakable voice, he said a single word, a word that sealed the fate of everyone in that room: monster. The word monster, spoken in Leo's fragile voice, hung in the living room air like a verdict. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Beatrice's sharp intake of breath. Dr. Evans's face, once merely concerned, hardened with alarming seriousness. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time, the nanny's mask of professionalism began to crack, revealing the panic underneath. "What?" she stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "He's just repeating the nonsense he heard from this girl. It's ridiculous." But the doctor wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Leo, who kept his finger extended, a small beacon of truth in a storm of lies. Dr. Evans leaned closer to the boy. "Monster," he repeated, his voice incredibly gentle. "Why did you call her that, Leo?" Leo lowered his hand. The effort of speaking and accusing seeming to have exhausted him. He looked at Anna, as if asking for permission or courage. The girl stepped forward, holding her mother's hand tightly. "Because she is," Anna said, her childish voice sounding surprisingly firm. "She says mean things to him. She throws his ball away on purpose, and she said his daddy doesn't like him anymore." Each sentence was a shovelful of dirt on the grave Beatrice had dug for herself. Elena felt an immense pride in her daughter, mixed with fear of what was to come. Dr. Evans stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Beatrice's pale face. "Beatrice, I think it's best if you wait outside," he said, his tone calm but unquestionable. "I need to examine my patient and speak with these witnesses." The word witnesses hit Beatrice like a slap. The color drained from her face. For an instant, she looked like she might argue, protest. But the doctor's gaze was like a granite wall. Defeated, she left the room, slamming the glass porch door behind her. With Beatrice's oppressive presence removed, the atmosphere in the room changed. Dr. Evans pulled up a chair and sat in front of Leo and Anna. He didn't act like a doctor, but like a gentle grandfather. He spoke to Anna first, asking her to tell him everything she had seen from the beginning. Bolstered by the security of her mother's presence and the doctor's attentive gaze, Anna recounted the weekend's events, her voice sometimes faltering but always sincere. She spoke of the cruel words, the ball thrown away, of how Leo's smile would vanish whenever Beatrice entered a room. Elena supplemented the story, speaking of her own suspicions, the boy's change in behavior, and the conversation she'd had with Mr. Davenport. Finally, the doctor turned to Leo. He gently took the boy's arm. "Leo, may I see your arm? Your friend here said you sometimes have bruises." Hesitantly, Leo held out his arm. The purple mark Elena had seen days before had now faded to a yellowish green, but it was still visible in the light. The doctor examined it carefully, his face an unreadable mask. "Someone squeezed your arm very hard, didn't they, champ?" Leo didn't answer with words, but his chin quivered, and a nearly imperceptible nod was all the confirmation the doctor needed. The truth was there, painful and undeniable, exposed on the skin of one child and confirmed by the courage of another. The puzzle was complete, and the picture it formed was horrifying. Dr. Evans sighed, a heavy sound of sadness and contained anger. He looked at Elena with newfound respect. "You and your daughter were very brave. I'm so sorry Richard didn't listen to you sooner." He picked up his phone. "I need to make a call. Richard needs to know this immediately." Dr. Evans' call to Richard was short and to the point. Eleanor couldn't hear the exact words, but the doctor's grave tone was enough to convey the urgency and seriousness of the situation. Outside on the porch, Beatrice paced like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear, likely trying to spin her own distorted version of the story, but it was too late. The truth, once freed, has a power all its own. The time following the call was an agonizing wait. Every minute felt like an hour. Dr. Evans stayed with them, his calm presence an anchor in the uncertainty. He placed a symbolic bandage on Leo's arm, a gesture more of care and validation than medical necessity, and the boy seemed to feel a little better, as if the act of someone finally acknowledging his pain made it more bearable. Anna, sensing the immediate crisis had passed, returned to her role as a friend. She found Leo's favorite dinosaur book and sat on the floor next to his wheelchair, turning the pages and describing the pictures with enthusiasm. "Look at this one, Leo. It's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's the king," she said. And for the first time on that terrible day, a small, fragile smile appeared on Leo's face. Their friendship, forged in the fire of adversity, was a spectacle of pure childhood resilience. Seeing them together, finding comfort in each other, filled Elena's heart with a mix of pain and hope. Pain for all that Leo had endured, hope that, with love and security, his wounds could heal. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel announced Richard's arrival. He burst through the front door, his face pale, his tie loosened, his eyes wild like a father who had just discovered the wolf was inside the fence. He didn't even glance at Beatrice, who tried to intercept him at the entrance. He walked past her as if she were invisible and rushed to his son. He dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair, his hands hovering, uncertain, as if afraid to touch and cause more pain. "Leo, my son, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice choked, broken with guilt and remorse. "Daddy didn't know. I should have listened. I should have seen." Leo looked at his father, confusion and relief warring on his small face. He reached out and touched Richard's cheek. The simple gesture of forgiveness from a child completely disarmed the powerful businessman, who broke down in tears, hugging his son's legs. It was a scene of raw pain and unconditional love. Elena and Anna quietly backed away, giving them space. Dr. Evans placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "You saved this boy," he said in a low voice. "You and your daughter. The words were a balm to Elena's wounded soul after she had felt so powerless for so long. After a long moment, Richard composed himself. He stood up, his face wet, but his expression was now one of cold, determined fury. He turned and walked toward the porch door where Beatrice stood, her face defiant, ready for a fight. But there would be no fight. "Pack your things," Richard said, his voice low but sharp as a razor. "I want you out of my house in 10 minutes. Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, to lie, to threaten. "You can't." 10 minutes, he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And if I ever see your face anywhere near my son again, I swear I will use every penny I have to make sure you never work with a child again for the rest of your life." The threat was absolute. Beatrice's mask finally crumbled, revealing the ugly face of fear and defeat. Without another word, she turned and hurried up the stairs. The monster had been cast out of the castle. Beatrice's departure left a vacuum in the house, a silence that was both relieved and heavy. The immediate threat was gone, but the emotional scars were still raw. Richard seemed like a man lost in his own home. He looked at Leo as if seeing him for the first time. Not as an extension of himself or a responsibility to be managed, but as a small, vulnerable human being he had failed to protect. The guilt was a visible weight on his slumped shoulders. He sat on the sofa, his head in his hands, the image of power and control completely shattered. Elena, seeing his anguish, approached with a glass of water. "Mr. Davenport, he's safe now. That's what matters," she said softly. He looked up, gratitude and shame mingling in his expression. "How could I have been so blind, Elena? You tried to warn me. I was so busy, so focused on giving him everything money can buy, that I forgot to give him what he needed most. My time, my attention." The confession was a turning point. The barrier between employer and employee dissolved, replaced by a shared humanity, that of two parents trying to do their best for their children. Meanwhile, Anna and Leo, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world, had created their own sanctuary. Anna, sensing that Leo needed something to feel strong again, invented a new game. She tied a cushion cover around his shoulders like a cape and declared him Super Leo, the protector of the garden. She became his sidekick, running ahead to clear imaginary obstacles from his wheelchair's path. "Watch out, Super Leo! A river of lava!" she would shout, pointing at a line of ants. Leo, playing along, would make straining sounds as he maneuvered his chair, laughter bubbling up from him, genuine and free, a sound Elena hadn't heard in months. The simple, pure joy of the two children was the most powerful antidote to the poison that had spread through the house. Later that night, after the children had finally fallen asleep, Anna in her guest room and Leo in his own, with his father watching over him from an armchair, Richard and Elena sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. "I don't know how to thank you," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "You and your daughter. You were the only ones who saw, the only ones who cared enough to fight for him when I didn't." Eleanor shook her head. "I did what any mother would do. Anna has a good heart. She saw an injustice and couldn't stay quiet." Richard looked down at his own hands. The hands that signed multi-million-dollar deals, but had proven incapable of protecting what was most precious. "That's going to change," he said, more to himself than to her. "Everything is going to change. My work, my priorities. Leo will come first, always." He then looked at Elena, a new plan forming in his eyes. "Elena, I know this is a lot to ask, but I need you, not just 3 times a week. I need someone here I can trust blindly. Someone who sees Leo as a person, not a job." The offer hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a job proposition. It was a plea for help, an invitation to be part of this family's healing. Elena thought of her small apartment, her routine. But then she thought of Leo and the bond her daughter had formed with him. She knew the right answer. "I accept," she said. In that moment, A new family began to form, not by blood, but by bonds of care, courage, and love. The days that followed were ones of delicate reconstruction. Richard was true to his word. He cancelled trips, delegated meetings, and started leaving the office at the time normal fathers get home. The most significant change, however, was not in his schedule, but in his attitude. He relearned how to be present. He started sitting on the floor with Leo, building block towers that inevitably collapsed amidst peals of laughter. He learned the names of every dinosaur in Leo's favorite book and invented different voices for each one during bedtime stories. For Leo, having his father back, not just in body but in spirit, was the most profound healing of all. The fear in his eyes began to be replaced by a newfound confidence. He started initiating conversations, expressing his wants, and most importantly, smiling more often. Eleanor and Anna became an integral part of this new family ecosystem. Elena took on the role of Leo's primary caregiver with a naturalness that came from the heart. She was no longer just the housekeeper, she was the house manager, the cook, the confidant, and the stable maternal figure the boy had been missing. Anna, in turn, flourished in her role as honorary big sister. She and Leo became inseparable. Their friendship was a testament to the ability of children to find joy and connection in the simplest circumstances. They created a world of their own in the mansion's vast garden, a world of imaginary adventures where Leo's wheelchair was not a limitation but a super vehicle, capable of traveling to distant planets or escaping invisible dragons. However, the shadow of Beatrice still lingered. One morning, Richard received a call from a lawyer. Beatrice was threatening to sue for wrongful termination and defamation, claiming he had ruined her reputation based on the fantasies of a child and the lies of a jealous employee. The threat, though empty, brought back some of the tension of the previous days. Richard was furious, ready for a legal war. It was Elena who calmed him down. "Mr. Davenport, don't play her game," she advised wisely. "It will only bring more stress and make Leo relive everything. We have the truth on our side. And we have something she will never have. Peace." Her words hit home. He realized that the true victory wasn't punishing Beatrice, but building an environment so safe and happy for Leo that the past would become irrelevant. Following Elena's advice, he instructed his lawyer to simply ignore the threats unless a formal suit was filed, which they both knew was unlikely given the doctor's testimony. A strategic flashback revealed a crucial moment from Richard's past. Years earlier, right after the accident that had put Leo in a wheelchair, and from which his wife had not survived, he had thrown himself into work as a form of escape. He believed that building a financial empire was the only way to ensure his son's safety and future, a way to compensate for the loss of his mother. He hadn't realized that in building walls of wealth around Leo, he was also building an emotional wall between them, leaving the boy vulnerable to emotional predators like Beatrice. This realization hit him hard, making him understand that true protection didn't come from bank accounts, but from presence, attention, and love. He finally understood what Eleanor, with her simple wisdom, had always known. The greatest wealth he could give his son wasn't a mansion, but a home. And a home, he now saw, was made of people, not things. 2 weeks after Beatrice's expulsion, the new household routine had settled into a rhythm of calm and joy. The transformation in Richard was the most remarkable. The ruthless businessman had given way to a devoted father, whose biggest negotiations of the day were convincing Leo to eat his broccoli or deciding which story to read at bedtime. One afternoon, as he watched Anna and Leo playing in the garden, Leo was on an adaptive swing he had installed, and Anna was pushing him gently. Both of them laughing in the sun, Richard felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly took his breath away. He turned to Elena, who was sitting on the porch, folding a pile of laundry. "I will never be able to thank you enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your daughter, She has the heart of a lioness. Eleanor smiled, her eyes on the children. She just saw a friend who needed help. Children understand justice in a way we adults sometimes forget. That same day, Dr. Evans came for a routine visit. After examining Leo, who greeted him with a beaming smile and showed him his new dinosaur drawings, the doctor called Richard and Elena into the office for a private conversation. His expression was serious. "I did some digging on my own," he began, opening a file folder. "I talked to colleagues, called in a few favors about Beatrice. Her name still cast a chill in the room. I found something disturbing. She was let go from 2 previous jobs under very similar circumstances, accusations of neglect and verbal abuse. In both cases, the families were wealthy, busy, and chose not to press the issue to avoid a scandal. They just fired her with a non-disclosure agreement and neutral references to get rid of the problem." The revelation was a gut punch to Richard. He hadn't been the first victim of his own misplaced priorities. Other children had suffered. "She used falsified references to get the job here," the doctor continued. "The system failed, but the more important thing is, she's still out there. She could do this to another child." The news lit a new fire in Richard. This was no longer just about protecting Leo. It was about protecting other children. The peace Elena had advised was for his family, but justice was for the community. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice firm. "Legally, our case is a child's word against hers, which is complicated," Dr. Evans explained. "But there's another way, a professional registry. If we can get her formally investigated and her name added to a list of unsuitable providers, she'll never be able to work legally with children again." The idea was a beacon of hope. It would require them to revisit the story, to give formal depositions. It would be painful, especially for Leo. Richard looked out the window at his son, who was now playing tag with Anna, his wheelchair gliding across the grass with surprising agility. He was happy. He was healing. Dragging him back into that trauma would be terrible. The dilemma was excruciating. Protect his son's peace, or seek a greater justice that could prevent another child from going through the same hell. He found himself at a moral crossroads. The father's instinct screamed to leave the past behind, to wrap Leo in a bubble of safety and never speak of it again. But the man he was becoming, the man who had learned about responsibility and care, knew that silence was also a form of complicity. He looked at Elena, seeking guidance in her wise gaze. She said nothing, just gave a slight nod, an expression of unconditional support on her face. The decision was his. Just then, Anna and Leo came running into the room, laughing and out of breath. "Dad! Dad! Did you see? I almost beat Anna!" Leo shouted, his eyes shining with pride and joy. In that instant, Richard's decision crystallized. He looked at his son's happy face and at the brave face of the girl who had saved him. He would do it, not for revenge, but for them, to honor Anna's courage and to ensure that Leo's smile and the smiles of other children like him would never again be erased by the cruelty of someone like Beatrice. The greatest moment of tension wouldn't be a battle in a courtroom, but the decision to fight, to turn their pain into a shield for others. Richard's decision initiated a careful and deliberate process. With Dr. Evans's guidance, they contacted Child Protective Services and the state's Child Care Licensing Board. The process wasn't a public court battle, but an internal investigation designed to be as non-traumatic as possible for the children. The most delicate moment was the conversation with Leo. Richard sat with his son, Elena by his side, and explained things simply and honestly. "Son, remember B," he began gently. Leo nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "We remember she wasn't nice to you, and we think she might not be nice to other kids either. Some good people want to talk with us to make sure that doesn't happen. Would you be willing to tell them what happened, only if you feel comfortable?" Leo looked at his father, then at Elena, and finally at Anna, who was sitting on the floor, holding his hand. Seeing the safety net around him, he nodded. "I can do that," he said, his voice small but firm. "Anna will help me." The interview took place in the mansion itself, in a familiar setting. A child psychologist conducted the conversation with remarkable skill, turning what could have been an interrogation into a gentle dialogue. Leo, with Anna by his side as his silent support, told his story. He didn't use dramatic words, but the simplicity of his narrative was devastating. "She said I was a burden, that Daddy would get tired of me. She hid my toys to make me sad." Anna supplemented his account, describing the scenes she had witnessed with the clarity of a child who doesn't know how to lie. Elena and Richard also gave their statements, corroborating the story. Dr. Evans's report, containing the physical evidence and the information about Beatrice's previous jobs, sealed the case. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Beatrice was summoned to a hearing. Without the support of a wealthy employer and confronted with a meticulously constructed case, she had no choice but to surrender. Her professional license was permanently revoked. Justice had been served, not with a bang, but with the quiet effectiveness of the truth. With that dark chapter finally closed, the family could focus entirely on their future. Richard threw a big party in the garden to celebrate the courage of the superheroes, Leo and Anna. It was a day of sunshine, colorful balloons, and chocolate cake. Friends from Anna's school were invited. And for the first time, the mansion, once a place of silence and loneliness, was filled with the laughter of children. Richard watched the scene, his heart overflowing. His greatest victory wasn't in business, nor was it the punishment of Beatrice. But this moment, seeing his son, surrounded by friends, happy and safe, just being a kid, he walked over to Elena, who was serving juice to the children. "Elena," he said, "this home is as much yours as it is mine now. What you and Anna have brought to this place, there's no money in the world that can pay for it." He then made a proposal that solidified their new family structure. He offered Elena and Anna the property's guest house to live in permanently, not as employees, but as part of the family, with all expenses paid and a generous salary for Elena that would allow her to focus solely on her new role and her daughter. It was a way to ensure that this new, precious family unit would never be separated. Elena, with tears in her eyes, accepted. The housekeeper who came to clean a house had ended up cleaning the souls of its inhabitants, building a home in the process. The housekeeper's daughter who defended the rich boy not only saved him, but united two worlds, proving that courage and kindness are the true pillars of a family. 3 weeks had passed since that revealing afternoon in the yard, but it felt like a lifetime. Autumn was beginning to paint the garden leaves in shades of gold and copper, and the softer sunlight streamed through the windows of the mansion, which now seemed to breathe an atmosphere of peace. In the living room, where a silent tension once reigned, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle was spread across the coffee table. Richard, Leo, and Anna were lying on their stomachs on the rug, focused on finding the right pieces. Elena watched from an armchair, a book in her lap, a serene smile on her face. This was the new normal, simple, shared moments that were worth more than any fortune. The most impactful transformation had not been the nanny's firing or Elena's change in status, but Richard's profound discovery. He realized that his emotional neglect, born from grief and a misguided idea of protection, had nearly cost him his son's happiness. The true legacy he would leave for Leo would not be his business empire, but the memories they were building together, piece by piece, like that jigsaw puzzle. Leo was no longer the withdrawn, frightened boy. The security of his father's unconditional love and Anna's constant friendship had made him blossom. He was loud, curious, and sometimes even a little stubborn, all the wonderful traits of a child who feels safe enough to be himself. His wheelchair was still a part of who he was, but it no longer defined him. It was just his mode of transport in a world he now faced with a smile and the certainty that he would never be alone again. Anna, the little lioness, had found not just a friend, but a brother and a purpose. The courage she showed that day had marked her in a positive way, giving her a quiet confidence that would stay with her for life. She had learned a powerful lesson, that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference when it speaks the truth in defense of a friend. The dynamic between the two children was one of perfect complicity, an extended family where the bonds of the heart proved stronger than any other. That afternoon, as the sun set, Richard fit the last piece of the puzzle into place, a sliver of blue sky. He looked at the two children beside him, their heads close together as they whispered about their next adventure. He looked at Elena, who was watching him with an affection that transcended any professional relationship. He finally had a home, not just a house. The wealth he had chased for so long was right here, on this rug, in his son's laughter, in a little girl's bravery, and in the wisdom of a woman who taught him that to care is the purest form of love. The journey had been painful, a path through suffering and guilt, but overcoming it had brought them to a place of hope and genuine connection. True wealth, he had learned, wasn't having everything you could buy, but protecting, with everything you had, that which is priceless. The brave girl hadn't just defended the vulnerable boy, she had rebuilt a family, teaching a millionaire father that the greatest investment he could ever make was in his son's heart.